Done. Quiet.
I'd expected it. I'm pretty sure it was Sergio.
We found a hole through which we were communicating. Sergio! Sergio!
Please, I need your help. I need your help. My Sergio is in the rubble.
I must have been nuts to even think about going in the building. But firefighters have this thing, we run into burning buildings when everybody else is running out of burning buildings.
I remember saying my name.
And he was directly in front of me. There was another gentleman, and he said his name was Sergio. And it dawned on me, Jesus, this is Sergio de Mello.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sergio Vieira de Mello. My message is very simple. Never forget the real challenges and the real rewards are out there in the field, where people are suffering, where people need you.
He was one of the bright stars, no question, probably maybe the brightest. He was the master magician, mediator, manager, massager of egos.
He was elegant. He was committed. He drew you in.
Sergio had an eye for women and enjoyed their company a lot.
With Carolina, he was saying, this is the woman I'm going to marry.
He really wanted to have a second chance at having a family.
I looked at the hole and I just said, holy crap.
I quickly jumped
The guy
out.
goes, do you need any help? And I said, come on down. We were driven, basically. We were determined that these guys were not going to die in this hole.
I put my ear and my mouth very close to the hole, and I say, Sergio, are you there?
A decision was made, and we all agreed on it.
I don't remember any of that. I've blacked that out.
I told him I love him. To be strong. And I'm going to get him out.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Kyiv Post. I'm with you today on a very special holiday. We apologize for the technical delay of some minutes, but I hope you can bear with us because it's going to be a very special 90 minutes here. We're here on the occasion of the 17th anniversary plus 1 day of the assassination of Sergio Vieira de Mello, who in shorthand is a rock star in the diplomatic community with many missions and many successes in many nations before a bomb blast killed him and more than 20 of his colleagues. In commemoration of this terrible tragedy, and he died in Iraq too. It was serving his final mission. He was the special representative to the UN Secretary General. He took a leave of office from his job as High Commissioner for Human Rights. Let's in commemoration. We're also commemorating the 17th anniversary plus 1 day of World Humanitarian Day. Not terribly famous holiday, but it was started in honor of Sergio, and it seeks to honor those who I have with me here today talking, who are going to all parts of the world in troubled zones and war zones and risking their lives to help people, as Sergio said, as Sergio committed his life to and gave his life to, as a matter of fact. So the good thing is, I mean, entire libraries are written about things that I know nothing about, and I did not know the Sergio story. I came to know it, and the world can come to know it through 2 Netflix movies. One's a documentary, and the other is a drama. And there's a wonderful book by Samantha Power, the former U.S. representative to the United Nations, about Sergio, the man who wanted to save the world. But I think it's so people can catch up with this life of this brilliant man. But let's start now with our partners for today. Is UNHCR Ukraine and Kyiv Post. We're both 25 years old today, and I have the honor of introducing the resident representative all the way from El Salvador. Has been in charge of the mission for 6 years now, and I believe with UNHCR for 25 years. Pablo Matu, I will give the floor to you, and please tell us about Sergio and World Humanitarian Day and your work here.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And again, it's a pleasure to be here today together with the Kyiv Post, because we are both celebrating 25 years in Ukraine. UNHCR has been present in Ukraine for the last 25 years, supporting both the government and the people of Ukraine. The Kyiv Post is also doing not the same job, but something that is intimately linked to the work of UNHCR, because you are also fighting for some of the same values that the UN and UNHCR fight for: freedom of expression, open and transparent societies, democratic values, etc. This is very important for UNHCR, because lack of good governance, lack of freedom of expression is what forces a lot of people to leave their countries, right? So I think we are different, because you're in the journalism, we're in the humanitarian area, but we also share quite a lot of things and values. And let me tell you, ever since I arrived, your newspaper religiously. So thank you very much for the work you're doing. We celebrated World Humanitarian Day yesterday, as you rightly mentioned, where we remember those like Sergio who were killed in the service of the UN, and particularly those who were doing humanitarian work. Humanitarian workers are often exposed to risks, and unfortunately, many of them have died in the line of service. So this is a day for us to remember all of them, and to also thank the humanitarian workers for the work they do. And in Ukraine, unfortunately, since 2014, there's been an increase in the presence of humanitarian organizations and humanitarian workers who are all trying to help this country address massive displacement of people from Crimea and from Donbass. And unfortunately, the conflict continues, and the humanitarian needs are still there.
Is that the top focus of UNHCR Ukraine's mission here?
Focus, that's a big focus, but we're also helping refugees from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Iraq. And a third part of our work, which not many people know about, is statelessness. These are people without a nationality, and interestingly, there's an estimate that in Ukraine there's about 35,000 people who may be stateless or at risk of statelessness. So we are doing humanitarian work in those areas.
Okay, thanks. That's a great overview. Now I would like to get into Sergio. He had so many diplomatic successes in East Timor, helping with independence there, was in Lebanon, was in Iraq, and many, many, many other countries. But little known, except for those who worked with him, he had a brief but important role in Ukraine. So I want to go to my friend Bogdan Nahailo, journalist and also a former longtime staff member of UNHCR in Ukraine, who worked with Sergio, knew Sergio, was a friend of Sergio's at a very critical time. Bogdan, can you give us what was going on at the time and what role Sergio played? Sort of take us back to that era, I believe it was 95.
Right. Well, first of all, let me say that, Brian, thank you to you and your newspaper. You published an article by me, in which I tried yesterday, in which I tried to summarize the information about Sergio and his connection with Ukraine and my recollections about him. I didn't work for UNHCR Ukraine. I worked for UNHCR headquarters and was representative in various countries. I've never actually worked for the Kyiv office. Funnily enough, I was in Belarus. That was the closest. I knew Sergio back in the 90s when I was asked to become senior policy advisor by the Japanese brilliant Japanese woman who was the High Commissioner at that time, Sadako Ogata. Look, the 90s were an incredibly complex time. We had former Yugoslavia falling apart. We had Rwanda, the genocide going on. There were so many challenges. And one of the challenges, perhaps not at the top of the list, was how to deal with the former Soviet region. 15 new independent states had emerged, but there was no generally accepted, internationally recognized approach that they were using. The Russians were concerned that 25 million of their Russian people were being forced out of Central Asia, for example, and they referred to them as forced migrants. Others were fighting amongst themselves, like the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis. There was a war starting in Chechnya. There had already been a conflict in North Ossetia. There was trouble in Tajikistan. The whole area was a mess, but there was violence and there were flows of people forced to leave their homes, some of whom were coming instead to Ukraine, from Georgia, from Abkhazia, for example. So Ukraine in the early 90s had a problem of not having a refugee status determination system as per international legal norms, and it had to deal with these people coming from the former Soviet area, but also Angolans, Afghanistanis, and many others who, coming via Moscow, had found it preferable to seek haven, political asylum, or rather asylum generally, in Ukraine. So that was a major problem. But the biggest problem that Ukraine was facing was that it had agreed in the early 90s, when it became independent, to take back 250,000 Crimean Tatars who had been deported during the Stalin era in May 1944. Now, these people wanted to return to Crimea. They didn't want to remain in Uzbekistan, where they were mainly. And there was resistance in Crimea from pro-Russian forces, and even Kyiv was a little bit dubious about allowing a theoretically Islamist Muslim population back. So there was a lot of negotiations were needed to persuade official Kyiv to allow this small nation back to Crimea, to expedite their receiving Ukrainian citizenship and to reintegrate them into society. And this is where Sergio comes into the picture, or rather Madame Ogata. Madame Ogata, she wanted to know where the hotspots were. And she realized that Crimea, given its location and the political sensitivities, Turkey, Ukraine, Russia, and all of that, that we needed to be there to help, and also not only in a humanitarian way and with legal help with the citizenship issue, but in a conflict prevention way, so that it wouldn't become nasty, that there wouldn't be violence between the local population and the Crimean Tatars that were coming back. So the first missions occurred late 94, then throughout 95. I personally took part in some of them. I was the senior policy advisor on the CIS countries. But Sergio, who at that time was brought back by Madame Ogata to the Geneva headquarters, he was given an overall responsibility for operations in UNHCR. And part of his brief was to deal with the former Soviet area. So he was interested in a coherent approach in partnership with other partners, OSCE, Council of Europe, International Organization for Migration, and out of that, together, we put forward this plan, which meant getting the Russians on board, getting the Ukrainians on board, trying to get the Balts on board, Central Asia, the South Caucasus, who were fighting one another, as I said, the Armenians and the Azeris. Complex undertaking. So that was one task that he was involved in, and of course he realized that Ukraine was important in this. But secondly, with Madame Ogata's the green light that she gave him and us, he was interested in Crimea. And eventually, in November 1995, he came here on a fact-finding mission. We have a colleague here who will tell us who is his interpreter, Merdula Bosch, but I helped prepare that mission and saw what the aftermath of it. Its importance was that Sergio, having met with top officials here, having met with the NGO community and refugees, he gave the green light to the beefing up of the presence of UNHCR here, raising the status of the office, and de facto our full-hearted involvement for several years in Crimea. So that was very important. Secondly, and this is an issue that few people know about, many of the countries we were dealing with were saying, well, Crimean Tatars, for example, well, that's history. That's the 1940s. What have they got to do with us? We've got genocide in Rwanda, we've got Bosnia, we've got Yugoslavia. So it was very important to try and get some kind of legal handle on the Crimean Tatar and others like the Meskhetian Turks. Let me give an example. Georgia, for instance, and Mikhail Saakashvili at the time was the Minister of Justice. I was in the mission that went to discuss with them. They did not allow the Meskhetian Turks, about 120,000, of whom were deported at the same time as the Crimean Tatars. The Meskhetian Turks lived on the border between Georgia and Turkey. And to this day, they were not allowed back. And so there were big problems with them because many of them got stranded. Sergio was aware of this. But what Sergio did was that he gave Madame Ogata permission, and we put out a special issue of this journal, Refugee Survey Quarterly, which was very authoritative in all of these circles. And it was fully devoted to the issue of ethnic cleansing in its newest guises and its former guises. And he wrote the introduction to this. And as a result of this issue, with many others contributing on other different parts of the world, we managed to get this notion of formerly deported peoples recognized, at least for the purposes of that CIS conference process, which was that process that I mentioned at the beginning, the attempt to have a coherent, comprehensive approach to the problems of displacement in the CIS area. So I wouldn't say that Ukraine or the CIS was top of his agenda, but it certainly, he was aware of the issues here. He was committed to helping to find durable solutions. And I tell you, as somebody who knew him, he was a very eloquent, charismatic, good-looking, sophisticated diplomat. And I think everybody expected that sometime down the road he would be the new, or at some stage, the Secretary General of the UN. I know we were talking earlier, did he want to go to Iraq or not? I know that he wanted to be the special representative in Angola. He is Brazilian, he speaks Portuguese, he was particularly interested in Angola. I ended up as the representative in Angola later, so I know this. And so he was, let's say, a quintessential humanitarian. He left a legacy, he left an example, and he left a contribution which is connected to Ukraine and the broader former Soviet space.
Bogdan, thanks for your overview. He was here then at least one time, right?
He was only here once, but he was all over the place. I mean, he was in the South Caucasus on missions. You know, you name it. He was, 1 week here, 1 week there. But if you saw him operate, I wrote many of his speeches for the CIS or for Ukraine. He would take a piece of paper for 10 minutes. He would digest that brief, and he would perform as if he'd been an expert on these countries for years, and he was so convincing in that role. At the highest level, we're talking at ministerial level, sometimes with presidents and whatever. He had this knack of being a gentleman, being very persuasive, expressing empathy with all sides, and managing to get agreement and to build the road forward. And I think that was his major contribution, apart from courage. He was not conventional, as Pablo, my colleague, the representative here of UNHCR, he was not always conventional in his behavior, for the way he behaved with the Cambodians, for example. He was prepared to take risks and not always play by the book, but he produced the results.
That's very great. That dovetails very closely with the documentary and the drama, and I'm sure with the book. Can you give us a personal anecdote, just a human anecdote about time with him?
Yes, we had a few drinks occasionally. He was a human being, and it was not all work, though. He was a workaholic. And his private life was his private life, and he kept it private to a greater or lesser extent. But sometimes he had time to come out to a party to greet a colleague or something. And I remember some people were a little bit awed by him and kept away. He was, after all, the Assistant High Commissioner, and he was responsible for operations. He treated me with respect because we were working so closely. And I remember we had a few whiskeys together one evening, and I asked him about the fact, a little-known fact, but you've read the book, that, for example, when he was 17 or 18, he was thrown out of France in May 1968 during the student protest there under de Gaulle, because he was a leftist, committed leftist, a Trotskyist at that time, and he was writing as a political journalist for a journal called Combat, and he was thrown out. Fortunately, his father was the ambassador in Brazil, and a few months later he got back in to finish his PhD on a philosophical theme. He was not just all action, he was philosophically minded. He knew his Hegels and Nietzsche's and Kant's and whatever, and could talk about that for hours too. But I asked him, how did he reconcile his youthful revolutionary spirit with the fact that he'd become kind of almost a very bourgeois figure, that sort of a leading bureaucrat, though operationally active representative of the UN. And he said, look, tactical decisions have to be made and readjustments made. Inside, I remain committed to the cause of the poor, to equality, to emancipation of all those who need it. But I've discovered that the way to do it, the way to be effective, is to work within those humanitarian, human rights-oriented organizations which give me that scope. So he said, I'm comfortable with it, though I know that you could probably criticize me that I sold out to the system, as it were. But that was a very sort of candid discussion. And I realized that he was at ease with his soul, with his commitments, with his principles, and that deep down he was still a revolutionary, but in a different sort of way.
Thanks, Bogdan. I think now is a good time. We have the great honor of having with us Medula.
Вітаємо Медулу. Щось я його не чую майже.
Medula is the board chair of the East European Development Institute, and she's an expert on international relations. She's from India. She spent a lot of time in Kyiv. We talked a little bit before this webinar. Medula, can you tell us what are your fondest and most important memories of that mission and of Sergio that you think people should know?
Well, already Bogdan said about the surrounding developments that were taking place at that time. I assisted in the mission and I took a few days of free time. My boss in UNDP, I was working with UNDP, he allowed me, and I was assisting. And if Bogdan recalls, I was not speaking Ukrainian so well that time, but I could speak, I could understand and translate. I was using Russian and Ukrainian, a mix of it, to convey what Sergio and others had to say, but I could definitely convey what the Ukrainian side had to say. So it was 3-4 days, I remember, a very hectic negotiations at all the top levels of Ukraine. Ukraine didn't have a legislation to help refugees. Ukraine didn't accede to any convention. Above all, Ukraine didn't even have a constitution. It was in 1995, and I think, it was a very, very difficult times because as per the data, there were 3,000, 5,000 people asking for asylum and UNHCR had to register them. The government didn't have any facilities and they were just working certain things. There were trainings, there were many things, but a lot of things had to be straightened out, which could be provided with a lot of high-level intervention. That was not, the local office was there, they helped a lot, but at certain points, Sergio's coming was very important. In fact, the mission he headed was very important in charting the further ways that Ukraine should take to have a framework for helping asylum seekers, for obtaining for the status determination procedures and how to approach the convention and how to accede to it. Even those things were not existing that time, and it was extremely difficult. And I remember, I will tell you about the very few moments that he would talk, like he would pause for helping me, like to convey the things. There are people who would talk incessantly, and you will not have the chance to even say the whole thing he said, lose track of what the person is telling, but he would always be so considerate that the message is conveyed. Very few people at that moment in such negotiations. Really, I found it very, 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 very responsible and very, very interesting. And I remember meeting the head of the Verkhovna Rada. At that time, I believe it was the first deputy, Mr. Diomin, if I'm not mistaken. He was quite hostile in the beginning, but after talking, he was like almost, ready to hug all of us and ready to say, oh, you're telling us so nice things. There was a very convincing set of arguments, I would say. And he used very simple languages so that it's easy for me to convey. The language was lucid, simple, and at the same time very convincing. He used it in a way that, as Bogdan said, I would again be repetitive, that he was a person within the format, but acting unconventionally, there was a lot to learn from the art of negotiation, the art of how to deal with governments which are not able to see through different, international opportunities available for humanitarian work. Also, I found at a personal level, like he spent some of his early career was in Dhaka in Bangladesh, which is a neighboring state of India, and the part of India I come from is neighboring Bangladesh, and my language, mother tongue, is Bengali. So I was standing and he inquired me where I come from, and then the weather was very cold. It was end of November, December, and I said, well, there were also other members of the mission. I said, it's just -4 today. It's not so cold. And he just looked at me and said, what's wrong with you? It's just -4 and it's not cold. He sort of, just told it so spontaneously, and it made me just think that, oh, I should also think where I come from. He was struck by how spontaneously I said, and he also spontaneously reacted. So that was something I said, oh, nothing is wrong with me, but I understand. That's fine. I met him once again, and in fact he came as a humanitarian coordinator, not from the HCR, but when the 10th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident was sort of commemorated in Ukraine, and we had Yashushi Akashi come, we had Fakhruddin Ahmed, and at that time it was a very high level people coming, and we had taken the first group to Chernobyl atomic power plant in the very power plant, and the first group with the journalists. And so I was working in UNDP. I again met him, and I just politely went and asked him that, you might not remember me, but I was there, and etc. Said, how you're doing? And it was very nice of him. He said, yes, I remember the mission. That was the ice-breaking mission in ice-cold Kyiv. I was just so surprised that, there were so many events in his life, but he remembered that he had come to break the ice and do so many great things. And I need to tell you that, there were no such publications I can show about him. But this was the Human Development Report, which, in fact, I was coordinating when I was in charge for many years. The 96 report, which came out, basically had a chapter, the first chapter of its sort, and it was developing a multi-ethnic society. And a lot of things that happened during his mission was with the permission of the UNHCR and its colleagues. There were a lot of things that were put into this report, and it was presented to the government. And it came out on the day the Ukrainian constitution was adopted. So, these kinds of memories get me think that, he was a great man, in fact, and he had his role to play in developing a multi-ethnic society in Ukraine. And I think we needed him a lot today. His advice would be very well sought today.
Did you?
Yes, could I just add to that?
Go ahead, Bogdan. Yes.
A footnote, because we've discussed this, but our listeners don't know. In his report, very detailed about coming to Kyiv, what should be done, who he met with, indeed. Mr. Dyomin is there, Vice Foreign Minister Kandorhi, and many others. But he mentioned twice, and I mentioned that in my article yesterday. It's very telling that in a detailed report for his superiors, for the High Commissioner, he has the time to mention and thank the person that did the interpretation for him, namely you.
Thank you. I know it's real treasure for me.
It sounds like another great experience. You had said he was unparalleled dynamism, is what you remember about him, and a very able negotiator. So even at that time, you saw that he was going places.
Well, yes, but that was the way, and he, in spite of not knowing the Ukrainian language, he understood the vibes, what we call the vibes, the vibes of the negotiations he could take, and he could be the sort of like, sailing the ship, he was guiding the negotiations. In fact, without dominating the counterpart, without being too imposing, he was having his arguments, he was not going out of the principles and out of the target. That was what the art of diplomacy is.
Okay. I think without further ado, I want to go to our other guest, Maki Shinhara, who worked very closely with the High Commissioner for Refugees, Sadaka Ogata, and also with Sergio. And she played a very poignant role she was with Sergio in Iraq, I believe. So, Maki, are you there?
Yes.
Can you take over and build on?
Yes, thank you very much, and very pleased to meet all of you, and thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting discussion. Where should I start? I think, just as Maria just said, one of the earliest memory of Sergio was how I was struck that
is your video on?
I think so, I'm sorry.
We can't see you.
We can't see you. We'd love to see you.
How do I do it?
At the bottom.
At the button, I'm sorry.
At the bottom, there should be switch on.
No.
Switch on video.
At the bottom, video. No, this is stop, and then this is on.
Maki is extremely talented. She managed to get through 5 months of quarantine without doing a single webinar. This is her first Zoom experience. So we have to take lessons from her.
No?
in any case, your story, your story is the important one. If you want to go with Sergio, because you wrote me this very eloquent description of your work with him, and even to the point, as I understand it, you were after his death, you were called upon to write the eulogy, which means that you were pretty close to him.
Yes, I'm sorry about this. I don't know why. I can see myself, but okay, then bear with me with the audio then. One of the first memory of Sergio was that here he is, Assistant High Commissioner for Refugees, which, by the way, was a post that Mrs. Ogata, then High Commissioner, actually created. There was one Deputy High Commissioner, but she really fought through UN New York to create another Assistant High Commissioner position. All the more she was very much keen on pushing not just the legal aspect of refugee protection, but also operations, to strengthen the operations so that, first of all, before you could engage in refugee status determination and so forth, you really need the refugees to be alive. It was as simple as that. So in that sense, during the time of Mrs. Ogata's tenure, HCR really grew into very effective operational agency at the time. Now, here he is, the first Assistant High Commissioner for Refugees, and I was a lowly, just entry-level UN staff. And one day he told me that, okay, Maki, I'm going to call you tomorrow morning. So I thought, okay. And the following day, following morning, I knew that he already left Geneva because he had to go on an emergency mission somewhere. I forgot where it was. So I knew that he was already on the plane, so I didn't really expect the call. But then a couple hours later, my phone rings, and then it was Sergio calling me from Zurich, where he was changing planes. And just to remind you that it wasn't really easy to call back then because we didn't really have mobile phones. So he calls me, and I'm just stunned and said, "Whoa, what are you doing, Sergio? What are you doing? You're on your way on a mission, and what are you doing calling me?" And he sort of got, and he says, Maki, just know this. If I promise to do something, I will do it. And that really stayed with me, to really keep the promise. He really, not just me, but he really made a point that he is the man of words. I mean, he will keep his promises. And that was one of the impressive things earlier on. Now, going back to the CIS conference that Bogdan described what the content of it was all about. As he said, it was not easy. Many of these new republics really did not want to be labeled together with the other countries in the region. But then we had to get all these governments to talk together, slowly talk together, agree on, what it is that a certain type of groups of people, why is it that they were moving? Why are they going from one place to the other? And they had to agree even to agree on the fact was not easy. What happened was, eventually, we slowly, it went over a year in numerous preparatory meetings, working groups, and so forth. And then it came to the point that it was only about 2 weeks to go till the June conference in 1996. So this was the last preparatory meeting. And at that point, we were almost there at the end. And then one of the major government went on an oratory, long oratory. It went on for like half an hour. basically expressing the dissatisfaction of all the things that we talked about. It was not necessarily the content, but it was just the atmosphere, and it just was really breaking up. And that turned the entire meeting very, very sour. And so at that point, listening to this oratory by the minister, we were thinking, I was working with him on the secretariat, and we thought, oh, shoot, there's no way. I think we would never have the CIS conference. And we were just shocked and depressed. And then that went on. And then came the chairman's summary, which was Sergio. And Sergio said in the end, okay, to summarize today's discussion, and it was just beautifully done. He said, okay, this government said this, that government said that, and then, okay, the conclusion might be this. Any questions? No. Next. And he just went bang, 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 because you know that as Bogdan said, there were already few conflicts in the region, brewing conflicts, palpable tensions between the governments. And then he just very eloquently, smoothly went through and summarized it and did not really give the chance for the delegates to actually jump in and regurgitate the complaints again. So, and then when it really came to the contentious issue, and it was not easy because it had to somehow do with the future funding and so forth as well. It was really at the heart of most delegates. And then, so Sergio said, okay, on this issue, he paused and says, let us take it as a homework. The secretariat would turn it around and give you a proposal in 1 week's time. And at that point, I remember I was kicking Sergio's chair. I said, Jesus, how are we going to solve this knot within 1 week before the actual conference? So that was a very striking incident that, again, I was a young officer, but I thought, whoa, this is really the true work of the UN, trying to chair and manage a multinational, international meeting with a lot of contentions and feelings and history and whatever. And here is this guy, Sergio, who basically will take everybody, respect everybody's opinions and the backgrounds and so forth, and then very smoothly pushed it forward. And that really stayed with me for a long time, even till now, obviously.
Where were you on August 19th, 2003?
I was, in fact, I was with Pablo. We were in Afghanistan. And we were working in Afghanistan. I went in right after 9/11. And then I remember it was a Friday, and it was a day off, so to speak. And I was in a car. And we had the BBC radio on, and that's when I heard the news that Baghdad UN was bombed. And then Sergio was stuck together with other colleagues. And so that was in the early afternoon. And then while doing whatever during the course of the day, I was still very certain that he will come out alive. I mean, he's a Superman after all. So I had no doubt, but I kept following. Then back then I had you didn't really have a good TV waves and things like that, and I had a relatively large satellite radio. So I was following the news into the night, and then just around 1 in the morning, I heard the BBC report that he didn't make it out alive. And I remember calling High Commissioner, right, now High Commissioner Filippo Grandi, who used to be our boss in Afghanistan, and talking to him, and he was crying, and we were all crying, and I remember Filippo saying, you know, Maki, this is so unfair. Why? Anyway, so that was really devastating, and that was for me personally, I took it to heart because at that point I'd been working in many conflict or war situations, from Yugoslavia to Kosovo and so forth, and obviously Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then I thought, well, you know, hold on a minute, I have to stop myself because under Mrs. Sogata, she was such a leader that she would really push the staff to do better than what they're capable of, in a way. So in a way, there was an atmosphere that, okay, we're going to go and jump, and we're not going to ask how high. And Sergio was definitely one of them that just kept on doing, pushing what he can do. Because, and I do believe that, you know, as with many other colleagues who's now retired, we did believe in Mrs. Ogata. We did believe in the good that we're doing, and we did believe in the governments to give us the power to actually help these people, namely the refugees. So what happened when he was killed in Baghdad, together with many colleagues, by the way, who used to work in Kosovo, very bright people. I told myself, okay, Maki, you have to take a break. Because if I keep going, I'm going to end up dead as well. So I was planning to take a break, and as I left Afghanistan, the irony is that Mrs. Sadako Gata, who then just took over Japan International Cooperation Agency, called me to come assist her, because she still also had some UN hat on herself. So I did, and then ironically, or interestingly, the first assignment I had was really to write sort of like, well, I can't really show it to you because you can't see my video, to write a piece on Sergio, Iraq, human security, and Afghanistan. And then I was going through a lot of his personal correspondences, obviously talking a lot about Iraq, and also recalling, some of you may have heard his last speech at the Security Council in New York, where he did the report on Iraq. And that was a desperate cry of trying to gather international support to give Sergio the legitimacy, UN the legitimacy to help support the Iraqi people in the aftermath of war. Anyway, during the course of this assignment, I really realized what an impossible assignment Sergio had at the time, and he himself knew it as well. Mainly because there was no coherent international community support to the UN in Iraq. As you know, at the time, the US was not interested in whatsoever on the reconstruction of Iraq. So in a way, he really wanted to talk to the people, and he wanted to ask them what they want as their future, and they want the UN to be legitimately supporting the people of Iraq. And that was not really possible at the time. Going forward, back 5 years later, in 2008, I actually had another opportunity to encounter Sergio's ghost, if you will. I was sent to Iraq as a UNHCR, but to work on behalf of the anti-UN family. UN had retreated since the Baghdad bombing. From Iraq, all the insurgents were running everywhere. It was a very, very dangerous time. But then by 2008, then SRSG decided, okay, it's time, we have to go back in and we have to go see the people. So I was up in Mosul to open up the northern provinces. And I was embedded with US soldiers and Marines. That was the only way that you can go around because of all the insurgents coming up north. And when I went up there, and I was effectively only one UN up in the north, many of the UN colleagues were very skeptical of me working around or being embedded with the military, because there's still, I think even now, very strong discussion against keeping humanitarian and military apart, and you have to be neutral, you have to be impartial. Neutrality and impartiality is not the same thing, by the way, so you can definitely be impartial. So people were saying, no, you cannot be seen with the Americans. The people will not, Iraqi people will not accept you or believe you. So such was the time. But what happened was, one day I was called by the Americans, Marky, could you please come over here and talk to this man? There was one Iraqi man, very well dressed. Obviously, he had a very white-collar lawyer or doctor, I forgot which one, occupation, and he was just so distraught and sitting on the pavement, and very, very angry against Americans. So I go and talk to him, and I show my UN ID. And I said to him, look, could you talk to me? I'm not an American, I'm Japanese, and I represent the United Nations. So then he calmed down and he started to talk to me of what his issues were and so forth. And then at one point I asked him, I have a question. What do you think of me moving around and working with these American soldiers? As a UN. And he just immediately told me, or almost snapped at me, you know what? The problem is not that you are with the Americans. The problem is that the UN is not here. So that again, that night, looking up at the starry sky and hearing all the remote bombing, I thought, once again, Sergio is right. You really have to talk to the people and never assume what you think they want. Again, it's what he wanted to do for the Iraqis and what he tried in East Timor and elsewhere as well is to, first of all, when you have a crisis and a dispute, he always went to the people and listened to them. In that way, they would give you the idea of how best to move forward. And then at the same time, you gain the trust of the population that you're trying to help. And to me, I think this was really the core critical spirit of what it means to work as United Nations. And in a way, he really, in my mind, he's really he was creative, courageous, as Bogdan said, very confident, and also very keen to search for ideas, different
Завжди
ideas,
відшуковує
even though
якісь
it might
думки,
sort
нові
of go
підходи, нові
off of
варіанти.
principles or
Причому не
regulations at
відходячи
the
від
time,
принципів і
he
правил,
had the
які були
courage to take it.
встановлені. Він все ж таки
And I think
знаходив там
he
якісь
was one
цікаві
of a kind,
підходи
and
до
he was
справи. Він таки
definitely
був
one of the
унікальний в
best
цьому роді,
that
і він
UN
був
had.
один з найкращих, хто працював колись в
Maki,
ООН.
it's good to hear your voice. I don't know if we have questions. My colleague
Так,
Yulia
я не
Kus
знаю,
will
чи в
tell
нас
us.
є
But I
питання
want.
від колег.
Did you watch the movies
Чи ви
about
дивилися
Sergio?
кіно про Серджіо?
Both the drama and the
І
documentary.
документальне, і
I did.
художественне.
Did you find them
Я
to be
дивився.
accurate
Ну і що, ви думаєте,
depictions
там
of
чітко
what you
відображено,
understood?
яким був Серджіо, як на вас, як на вашу думку?
Can I be very honest?
Please.
I think, yeah. I think
Я думаю,
no, the documentary was
що
really, really
документальний
powerful.
матеріал
And
дуже гарно
incidentally, I was
зроблений.
actually reading Samantha Power's book, but
Я
before going into
спілкувався зі
Baghdad, I
Самантою
couldn't
Пауерс,
finish
але
it. So I
перед
had
тим,
the
як я поїхала
last,
до
I
Багдаду, вони це
copied, I
завершили,
made a
тому
copy of
я
the last
зробила
chapter,
копію
which was the
останньої
most powerful of her book as
останнього
well.
розділу
And
цієї
was
книжки, яка
actually
дуже
reading
така, як
in
на мене,
Mosul.
гарна. Це вже було
It-
за часів,
I
коли
think the
ми були в
documentary is
Мосулі.
really
Отже,
powerful.
документальний фільм дуже гарний.
Recent movie
А
is
нещодавно,
obviously there
нещодавніше
are
кіно.
fictional parts
Ну, там
intentionally.
щось пригадано, але це робиться так для кіно,
For
щоб цікавіше
example,
було.
Guy
Не без того.
Locher, who
Гей Лотер,
just recently passed
який
away,
нещодавно
who had
також
to get
помер.
his legs cut off to
Йому
try to
ампутували
save also
ноги.
Sergio. He was not an assistant that followed him, for example, but
Він не був
in the movie they
асистентом тоді,
combine
але
several
в
things.
кіно вони
The
щось
other
там
thing is,
домислюють
I
іноді,
think,
ну це не страшно.
I don't know, maybe I'm
Я
too
не знаю, може
particular
я
because we
дуже
are in
великі
the same
підробиці
business,
вдаюся, в
but
принципі, ми всі одну
I
справу робимо.
wonder if
Мені просто цікаво,
the work
чи оця робота
of Sergio
Серджіо
and the complexity of it,
і складність цієї
of
роботи,
moderating between
тому
factions,
що
between
він між
warring
фракціями там
parties and so forth,
намагався знайти
could
варіанти
not have
між сторонами
sort of brought out,
збройного конфлікту.
illustrated
Я не
a
знаю,
little
чи це
bit more.
вдалося
That's my
гарно
only
у
criticism.
кіно це
But
показати. Я
otherwise, I
гадаю, що
think
не
it
дуже
makes a
це гарно
powerful movie.
показало, а
There
так, в
was a
принципі, кіно
scene in
непогане, як на мене.
the drama, not the documentary,
Ну,
that
якщо ми говоримо
highlights
про
the
кіно, не
conflict
про
between
документалку,
the
там
United
йдеться про
States
конфлікт
government,
між
Paul
урядом
Bremer,
США
and Sergio representing the United
і
Nations.
Серджіо,
Was that
який тоді
real?
представляв ООН. Чи був
Or
такий
is that
конфлікт
just
дійсно?
dramatized to
Чи
make
це
the
просто
movie
так
more
для кіно
interesting?
зробили, таке, щоб
Basically,
цікавіше було
and in
дивитися?
fact, as I
І, до речі,
understand it,
наскільки я
the United
розумію,
Nations was the target
ООН
specifically because
були тоді
Al-Qaeda
мішенью, тому
saw
що
them as
Аль-Каїда
well,
вбачала,
the terrorists who blew up
що ну, це ті терористи, які, в принципі,
who set the
підірвали
bomb, saw them
бомбу.
as no different than the United States.
Ну, вони вважали, що Саддам це те саме, що
Is that
США,
true?
це одного
It
поля
was,
ягоди. Чи це так?
the tension was definitely true.
Ну, в принципі, таке тертя там
And
було,
that
так, була
was really
напруженість,
part
і
of the frustration. I mean,
це
quite a bulk
розчаровувало
of the
нас.
frustration that Sergio was
І
feeling.
Серджіо
Like as I said,
відчував таке розчарування. Я вже
UN
вам
was
казала,
told to
що
go back in and
ООН
reconstruct Iraq,
сказали приїхати
whereas the
назад до
major
Іраку,
power,
відновити Ірак,
occupational
але
power, US at the
окупаційна
time,
влада була тоді
had
американська
really no
там, і
interest
вони не
in really
цікавилися
helping to
відновленням
solve the
Іраку, вони не
post-conflict,
допомагали в
and
розв'язанні
helping the
конфлікту,
people
вони не допомагали місцевому
to
народу
restart up their lives. And in that
поновити
situation,
нормальне
he was
життя.
put there.
І от в такій ситуації опинився тоді Серджіо з
Yeah,
співтоваришами
so
своїми.
I think that
От я
tension
думаю,
was
що
accurate. Mind you, I think,
така складність там
as I
була.
said, by
І,
the
як я
time
вже казала,
2008, when I
у
went in,
2008
what I
коли
saw
я
was
приїхав, я
some
побачила на власні
American
очі, що
policy really
американська
had
політика
changed.
змінилася по Іраку тоді, і
And they were more,
вже
even the military with the
навіть
civilian engineers,
військові
they were
і
more
інженерні
focusing
підрозділи,
on
вони більше
reconstruction
вже
of Iraq.
говорили про
But
відновлення Іраку, але
unfortunately, at the time of Sergio,
тоді
there was really there was no consensus
не
on
було
how
консенсусу
to
щодо того,
utilize UN for that
як
matter
використовувати
for
ООН в
the
цих цілях
betterment
для
of
того, щоб
the people of
покращити
Iraq.
становище
Must have
іракського
been
народу.
frustrating. The other
Так,
things
це
that came
було дійсно
about was
велике
his unconventional
розчарування.
style. He believed that he needed to talk to the enemies, to the other
Завжди
side,
віднаходив
to the
варіанти,
people as
як
well.
помірити
So
протилежні
this
сторони,
must have
як
been a
знайти
frustrating
варіанти
experience
переговорів. Тому
for him
для нього
to
було
end
великим
the
дійсно
career,
розчаруванням от з таким стикнутися
as he had
в своїй
predicted the
кар'єрі.
difficulties would be, as it turned out.
Виникали
Did I
великі
get you right
складності
that you were
через це.
involved in the eulogy? Was that difficult, or is that
Коли
something
ви
that
останні
was
слова про
easy for
нього
you to do?
казали на похоронах, це було як вам?
Oh, it was really, really difficult
Це було
because
дуже складно, я вам скажу.
just
І
before the
от
Baghdad
перед Багдадом,
incident,
перед багдадським
sorry, not before,
інцидентом, ні,
right
не перед
after the
тим,
Baghdad
після
incident, we
багдадського
actually lost a
інциденту
colleague
ми
she,
втратили
in
колегу
Kabul, I mean outside
в
of
Кабулі,
Kabul in
неподалік
Afghanistan,
Кабулу в Афганістані.
who took 6 bullets.
Шість
She was a
пуль
young French staff, 24,
було випущено в
27 years
цього
old at
молодого
the time.
француза,
Bettina
який
Guala.
працював там.
So you can
Тоді,
imagine, you
вже
know,
можете собі
so I just
уявити,
came out
от
from,
я тільки
again,
приїхала
this conflict and war
з
and
конфліктної
Sergio's
зони,
death and the others,
Серджіо загинув там, і інші
and then
колеги.
this was the first assignment.
І
It
потім
sort
в мене
of
було таке завдання, що
was well, it was sort of catalytic
і
to me in the end, I
мені було
realized,
це дуже
but I
важко, я
cried and cried when
зрозуміла,
I
що я
saw, when I
завжди
went
плакала,
through his
коли
personal
произнесла ці слова.
correspondences
Я
and what,
ознайомлювався, я
trying to figure out what
ознайомилася з
went
його
on in
перепискою
his
особистою.
mind
Я
during the time
зрозуміла,
of
що було в
very
нього в голові
difficult
в ті
Security
часи,
Council speech.
коли він
And
виступав
that
на
just,
рівні Ради
I
безпеки.
cried all
І
night,
я от
and that
проплакала
sort
всю
of
ніч тоді, і
was a relief,
після
or
того було
I just
полегшення.
released whatever tension and
Просто
whatever
скинула з себе
anger
все
that
це,
I
що
had inside of me.
накопичилося, все гнів, все
Then I sort of
недовольство,
calmed
і
myself down and
потім
started writing,
я
and then
вже
it sort of,
заспокоїлася,
everything sort of
прочитала все це і
connected. I mean, it was about
зрозуміла, що до
Sergio,
чого.
yes,
Я
it was
зрозуміла,
about Iraq,
яким був
what
Серджіо,
he
що
tried
було
to
тоді
do,
в
why
Іраку,
it
що він
didn't
намагався
work
зробити,
out,
чому він
and
намагався це
what was
зробити.
it that Sergio
принципі,
believed in, which in
у
this
що
case we
вірив
called it
Серджіо,
human security,
ми це називаємо безпекою
to
людей.
empower each and individual
Вірив в те, що кожна
people
людина має мати свої відповідні права,
to better
можливості,
themselves as well, help
і
themselves.
тоді вони будуть
And
ставати кращими
what's going to happen
і
to
допомагати
Afghanistan?
собі
At the
більше.
time, I think
В
that was
Афганістані за тих
incredible
часів
work that I had to do, and
в мене
I
було
can't
чимало
show it
роботи,
to
і
you, but I
я
have the
не
book
можу
here.
вам
It's
це
called Human
показати, але
Security
тут в
for
мене є
All,
книжка
and this was a
«Безпека для
collection
всіх»,
of
і це, власне, підбірка така
articles
статей,
surrounding Sergio at the
які
time. That's been
стосуються
written
роботи
by
Серджіо
various
за
people.
тих часів. І там
Well,
згадуються
during
і
the
різні інші люди.
rehearsal, your
коли
video
була
did come on.
репетиція,
So
то
if you
відео
find out
ваше
how to do
було.
that, we'll be happy
Я
to
не
see
знаю,
you.
куди
But
воно
you have a
поділося.
melodic voice,
Але
and so
ми вас
it was very
почули,
easy to
ваш
listen to.
мелодичний голос, і дуже гарно це все
Wait a
пройшло.
minute, Bogdan,
Незважаючи на
because
те, що
we
була
are running out
картинка.
of time.
Так,
We've
ми
got
завершувати
about
маємо.
20 minutes left, and I want to
Залишається
bring
в
this
нас хвилин
home
20, і
with some
давайте
lessons and a very important
розглянемо,
guest
які
here,
є
who not
надбання
only
по
is
результату того, що ми
with
розглянули.
UNHCR Ukraine, but he's
У
Brazilian as
нас
well.
є
He's a
представник
Russian brother,
ще
as I
один
understand
з
it. He joined
Бразилії, який
UNHCR
працює
12
у
years ago,
ВКП.
2008.
Він
And there's so
2008-му
many
розпочав
lessons
роботу, там
here,
багато уроків
and
можна
you
винести для себе з цього
thanks to
всього.
Power of
І
Hollywood for elevating Sergio's story
дякуючи
to a global
Павлу,
level.
ми можемо цю історію про Серджіо підняти
So,
до
as a
глобальних щаблів.
Brazilian, I
Отже,
mean,
як
how is he regarded now?
бразилець,
And
як
I
буде
must
це
say,
ставити
going
зараз, я маю
through all
сказати,
this,
от
I mean,
розглядаючи все це,
when you put yourself at risk like
коли
this,
береш на
it
себе такий
brings home the
ризик, то
choices
стаєш
of
перед
do you
вибором,
continue this.
чи
I mean, I don't know if that
продовжувати
goes on in
це,
your profession or not. I mean, I'll tell you a
чи
personal story. My
продовжувати
newspaper in
в цій
2003
професії
offered
бути
me
чи
the
ні.
chance to go
У
to Iraq
2003 році я
on an
також мав
embed, and
шанс
I
бути
said,
в
no,
Іраку.
thank
Я
you.
побував там, потім сказав, ні, це все не для
I'm
мене.
not going to do that. I mean,
Я
I had
цим займатися
interviewed
не буду.
6 months
Я
before a
проходив
Marine who
інтерв'ювання за
lost part
півроку
of
до
his brain
того,
to an IED.
і я
He was still
побачив,
alive,
що
and I said, I just
одного
don't think
моряка
that this is for
поранили
me.
в голову, і
But
він був ще
war
живий, але його стан вже був
is
ніякий. І
unpredictable, and
я так
sometimes you come
зрозумів,
to
що
Ukraine
війна
and
це
the
щось
war comes to you.
непередбачуване, тому
So,
я краще,
Hugo,
от
there's so many
приймуся до
lessons
України,
here.
буду
Can you
тут
help
тихенько
us navigate
працювати.
how we
Отже,
should look at
розкажіть
this?
нам, як ми тепер
Sure,
все
Brian.
це
Look,
маємо
thank you very much.
розглядати.
First and foremost, let me thank my
Я хочу
colleagues
подякувати
who
колегам
were
It's
an honor and pleasure to hear the stories of Sergio. I am, I would say, at the beginning of my career with UNHCR. With 10 years now, I was in Africa and in Asia and Myanmar. And unfortunately, I had not had the honor of meeting Sergio such as Mr. Bogdan and Ms. Maki and Pablo, our representative, have. But of course, as a colleague who hasn't met him, I almost feel somehow that I have in many ways. Before Ukraine, I was in Myanmar, and Sergio was very, very active in the Asia region. So I met a lot of colleagues who have met him, who have shared stories with me in Africa as well, and of course in headquarters in Geneva. So as I was saying, I've had my 10 years. I consider myself at the beginning of my career, not as compared to my colleagues who have already spoken. And as you know, 90% of our colleagues are in the field, many of them serving in many difficult locations. And in these locations, next to refugee camps, we live in places called compounds, right? We live in these UN bases, and there are no weekends. So what do? You talk with your colleagues, you talk a lot with your colleagues, and we reflect on the examples that have preceded us. And Sergio Vieira de Mello, also an honor to be a compatriot of mine, is one colleague that we have always talked about, reflected upon. We watched the documentary together in UN compounds, the movies, we've read the books, and we've always debated together with other colleagues who I'm sure are watching us today. What would Sergio do in these situations? In fact, in one location, we had a common running ceremony. Before going to the refugee camp, we would say, "Did you receive the blessing of Sergio?" Yes, I believe we have. And then we would go. So to sum up some of the lessons that are not only mine, are loosely based on the book of Samantha Powers, which I recommend, but also have been refined with other of my colleagues who are working in the field. Here are some of them that we want to highlight, just to take some takeaways. The first one, and this is one that he's always emphasizing, is as a UN worker, be in the field, be close to the people that most need you. As you know, he worked in a number of very, very difficult locations. He not only worked, but lived there. This is important, right? In Cambodia, Sudan, Cyprus, Bangladesh, and many other places. Colleagues from these places would tell me he would be picked up at the airport, Sergio, on his first day of mission. What would he do? He would jump on the front of the car with the driver and start chatting away to the driver. And it was his mantra of saying, the briefing of the driver is one of the most important that I will get. So this is one of the most important moments for him, and this is something that we, as colleagues, have taken as one of his lessons. Also, he really tried in this need to be close to the field to learn the language. So, for example, Timor-Leste, he tried to learn Titu, in a language I think most of us have not heard of, but he apparently became relatively fluent. The second lesson that he drove home, and we are always trying to reflect on that, the UN is an international organization, the Security Council, the General Assembly, the international law, but if we don't deliver real change and impact to the persons in the field, then what is this all for? So he was really strong on this, and he would say, as the book of Samantha Powers says, if there's a possibility of closing a refugee camp, right, where many refugees are living across the globe today, then we should take that opportunity and fight for solutions for those refugees, right? The third lesson that he left us is you should talk to everyone, not only the good guys, but also the bad guys, because this is the only way you will understand the complexity of the problem. We are now in the Twitter age, and we want quick solutions, right? We want to find everything quickly, and we think problems have easy solutions. But sometimes solutions to problems that are more complex, and talking to some bad guys is important. He was in Cambodia, he repatriated thousands of Cambodian refugees, and he was only able to do that by meeting with the Khmer Rouge. And to the surprise of many of his colleagues, when he met the Khmer Rouge, he treated these guys that were responsible for a lot of war crimes with respect and dignity. And they learned to see
не
that
ображав їх.
maybe
Він зрозумів,
supporting this
що
guy,
може через підтримку
helping the
цих
refugees
людей
return,
він
repatriate to their
може
country of origin
допомогти
would be
біженцям.
important.
Нехай вони полишать Камбоджу
The fourth one
неушкодженими.
is dignity of every person is important. I was an intern in headquarters, and when people would find out that I was Brazilian, they would tell me, "Oh, you have big shoes to fill." We had Sergio Vieira de Mello. Of course, this was immense pressure for me. But I found that, for example, even security guards in headquarters have his photo. Cleaning ladies who remember him. He really had this ability of touching everybody, each and every one of us, independent of rank. The fifth one, which for me is particularly important as a Brazilian, and I think speaks a lot of to Ukrainians who are also humanitarian, is be proud of your origin and make it your asset, right? As a Brazilian, sometimes as Ukrainians, we feel in our countries we have a lot of problems, we have a lot of issues. Why should we go out and have an impact in the world? But he proved that actually no, it is exactly people that come from some of these countries that actually can relate sometimes to the problems in these other countries and have an impact. So this was for me particularly inspiring as a humanitarian Brazilian in the United Nations. And the sixth one, I guess, is be that field person. Right? Carry that dignity that we've spoken about. In fact, he was always criticized, why are you wearing a tie to meet refugees in the refugee camp? And he would say, but they deserve me to be as best looking as I can if they want to take me seriously. And they are also dignified just like you and me. But the sixth one is really also be the philosopher. Right? Read the policy, understand the law and the reasons why you're there, but don't be only driven by the philosophy, but be driven by the people and the people that you are meeting. So these are some of the lessons that colleagues, that myself and other colleagues have grappled with, right? Reflected upon in many of these locations where I've worked before.
That is a very good way to sum up.
Так, це був дуже
A
гарний
man that
підсумок.
We all, as you say, feel like we know now, even though
Ми
he's
тепер
been gone 17 years. and We
через
don't know
17
him.
років багато про що дізналися,
Closing
але ми
thoughts.
багато про що не знали. Я кажу про Серджіо.
Богдан.
І тільки зараз щось нове про нього розуміємо.
Jump in,
Так, ми
Bogdan,
будемо
you're in.
переходити до
Very
завершення.
quickly. Look,
Богдан,
I think Sergio
коротенько.
represented
Серджіо
the
представляв собою, як на мене,
side of the UN that makes us
ту
proud of
сторону
the
ООН,
UN.
яка
UN gets a
дозволяє
bad
нам
press, and
пишатися
very
ООН.
often very deservedly. There's a lot of deadwood, there's a lot of wastage,
Не все, що
inefficiency,
ми робимо
etc.
вірно, не
But
все
Sergio,
правильно, не все
and I
вдається,
think
але Серджіо,
UNHCR,
і, в принципі,
as an
УВКБ в
operational
цілому,
agency that's
як
on the ground,
структура,
that's not just sitting in offices and
це не
getting
тільки
fat
якийсь офіс, в
salaries, but
якому
it's there
працюють люди.
day to day.
Просто
Many of
там
us
на щоденній
staff,
основі
and I say
відбувалося
our because
щось,
I still feel
і ми про щось
connected,
нове дізнавалися,
after
щось
20
нове
years.
для себе
They're
розуміли.
risking their lives. They're on the front line.
Ми ризикуємо
And,
життям, ми їдемо туди, де
they work in
небезпечно.
that spirit
І
that's
ця робота особлива,
Sergio
вона, в
epitomized.
принципі,
And I think what
відображалася
I'd
в
like
тому,
to
як
say,
мислив і
though I'm
працював
now
Серджіо.
retired,
І
watching UNHCR
тепер
in
я
Ukraine,
бачу, як
they
УВКБ
don't get the
працює по
credit
Україні,
that
і
they
може
deserve. Look,
не всі цінують те, що не
1.5 million
роблять, але
people
1,5
displaced.
мільйона людей
That's twice
переселених.
as many as in
Це
former
вдвічі
Yugoslavia.
більше,
That's a
ніж було в
huge
колишній
number of
Югославії. Це
people,
величезна
right,
кількість
from
людей
Crimea and
з
from
Криму,
the
там,
Donbas
з
region.
Донбаського регіону.
The humanitarian work, the logistical
Гуманітарна
work,
робота,
the legal
логістична
assistance
робота,
that needs
правова
to be given,
допомога
the
надається
funds
людям.
that need to be raised,
Все
governments
це слід
need to be
забезпечити,
persuaded
і
to
уряд
help
має
at a
бути
time when there are
переконаним допомагати цим людям.
any other number of problems in the world, where
того виникають
Ukraine is,
інші
at the bottom
проблеми,
conflict.
і
It's let them
Україна
deal
має
with
на
it
своїй
themselves.
території
And
свій конфлікт.
I think on this 25th
Отже,
anniversary, as somebody who was here from the very
сьогодні
beginning,
на річниці
I have a
ми
right to say I'm very
почули
proud of this
багато про
organization.
Серджіо
But I
від тих
feel
людей, які
that
з ним
Ukraine
безпосередньо працювали. Я
and Kyiv,
пишаюся тим, що
official
ми
Kyiv,
робимо, і
but
тут
the population
в
generally
Україні, в
should be
офіційному
more
Києві,
aware
в
of what
принципі,
they've done, what their contribution has been,
слід
and
розповідати
the
більше
difference
людям
that
про
they
те,
have
що
made
він
in
робив,
everyday
і що
life
вдалося
to millions of
зробити, і
people.
як це допомогло покращити становище мільйонів осіб з
Thanks,
різних
Bogdan.
країн.
Medulla, Maki,
Дякую. Медула, Макі, щось додасте?
any final thoughts?
I could say
На
just
завершення.
two sentences that
Я буквально в двох фразах скажу, що
reflecting about Sergio,
коли ми думаємо про
what that
Серджіо,
immediately comes to my mind is
то я
I'm
одразу
ever proud to be
пригадую,
part of the
що
system,
я
even for
пишаюся,
not
що
so
я в
long
цій
time like
системі,
Bogdan,
хоча,
but for a
може, не так довго, як
significant period
Богдан,
of
але
time
тим не
that
менше я
you
вже певний час
And the way
пропрацювала, і
Sergio could interconnect that
Серджіо
humanitarian
от
crisis should be
пов'язував
dealt with, otherwise there's no
варіанти
room for
розв'язання
development.
гуманітарних
And
криз
that's what
і
in
подальшого
UNDP we realized, and
поступу.
I think
От
he
в ПРООН ми
made
йдемо
his
цим шляхом, і
point even greater when he became the humanitarian coordinator of the UN.
тому ми сьогодні маємо посаду гуманітарного координатора
Макі,
на рівні ООН.
any
Так, дякую.
words of
Макі.
wisdom?
Yes. No, I think as for Hugo and the future generation,
Я думаю, що це
I think
корисні
what
уроки для
Sergio
майбутніх
and
покоління.
indeed it was
Такі як
Mrs.
Серджіо
Ogata who
та й
really
пані
tried
Огата, вони от
to
намагалися
listen to people,
прислухатися до
even
людей,
listen to bad guys,
прислухатися
as she
навіть до
would say,
поганих хлопців, як вона це
to
називала,
try to come up with a solution and
щоб
try
знайти
to find a
рішення
way to
і
help people and move
варіант
forward. I
допомогти
think
людям.
this is really
Я думаю,
a
що
critical
це дуже
thing for the UN. But on
важливий
the other
момент
hand, I
для ООН.
realize now, here we
Я
have
тепер
a
я
pandemic.
розумію, що от
It's
зараз є
really not that
пандемія,
easy
і
to actually go
непроста
and
ситуація,
go to the front line
не
and go
просто
talk to the
вийти,
rebels and the people
поспілкуватися
and the
з
refugees
різними
and what have
людьми,
you.
там, з біженцями,
So
з
I'm just
іншими.
wondering,
Тому
well,
от мені
this
цікаво
is
таке.
really, really too bad because
Ну,
at the start
ситуація
of this
вкрай
pandemic, I was
важка. На
thinking,
початку
okay,
пандемії я
I
думала
can
так,
go
що
and
я можу
negotiate with
вийти
the
провести
rebels,
переговори там з Білорусі,
but I
наприклад,
cannot
але
negotiate with the
я
virus. How
не
do you do
можу
that?
провести переговори з
So in
вірусом.
that sense, you know, unfortunately,
Тобто
the future is very, very difficult. But on the other
майбутнє буде
hand,
складним, але з
perhaps
іншого
there is,
боку,
if the will is there,
якщо є
there could
бажання,
be other ways. For
то
example,
можна
like this,
намацати
with the
варіанти
Zoom
продовження
meeting, which
роботи,
I
навіть через Zoom,
obviously
як
failed
зараз.
to really
Я не дуже з цим впоралася сьогодні,
show my
розумію,
video, but
в плані
there
картинки,
could still be a
відео,
different
але тим
ways
не
that the
менше
future
можна
generation
розвивати
could
різні варіанти,
actually
як в майбутньому наступні
work it out
покоління
to
зможуть працювати і розв'язувати
continue
нагальні
to listen
питання.
to those
Слід
people who
прислуховуватись до людей, до тих
UN
людей,
humanitarian
які
agencies are
підпадають під
trying to
діяльність
serve.
гуманітарної агенції
So
ООН.
very best of luck with
Тому
Hugo.
Thank you very
дякую вам
much.
всім за увагу. Юго,
This is great.
тепер слово,
I
думаю, вам
think
знову.
that, I mean, I want to thank
Це
Pablo,
було
first of
дивовижно.
all,
Ну, давайте
for
подякуємо Пабло,
doing
по-перше,
this
за
and
те,
helping
що
us
все це
not only be
відбувається,
able
і
to tell the
це
story of
допомагає
Sergio
нам не тільки розповідати про Серджіо,
and the Sergios who are out there in the field now,
як і що він
working,
робив там, де він працював,
but also to
але
tell
також
the little
це
known, the lesser
варіант
known Ukraine work that he had.
поговорити про ту роботу, яку
Can
він
you,
проводив у вашій країні,
I
про
think
що
it's
не
very
багато хто
appropriate for
знає.
you to end this discussion today
Ми
and talk
наближаємося
about
до
what we can
завершення
do to
цього
help the
обговорення.
UNHCR,
Що можемо зробити, щоб
what the
допомогти
mission
ВКБ? От
challenges you face
які
are facing now.
складнощі
and try-
має ваша місія, ваша структура тут наразі. В принципі, вони ми також багато в чому допомагаєте. От за останні 5 років я побачив багато статей не про ВКБ, але про інші теми, які дотичні до гуманітарних агенцій ВКБ. Йдеться про проекти, які ми фінансували. Я його майже не чую, вибачаюся. Це все до питання, чому ми тут. І от такі, як Серджіо, підкреслили, що ООН тут для того, щоб служити народу України, підтримувати уряд і усіляко дбати про добробут народу. У конфліктних ситуаціях, на жаль, іноді ми маємо сідати за стіл переговорів з різними сторонами. Тут у вас в країні іноді люди занепокоєні тим, що ми ще тут працюємо в Донецьку, в Луганську, в непідконтрольних територіях. Але ми маємо це робити, тому що там є також мешканці України, які там страждають через цей конфлікт. Їм потрібна гуманітарна підтримка. І щоб це робити, ми маємо переговори вести зі сторонами, які представляють ті території. Тому я хочу подякувати Kyiv Post за влаштування цього заходу. І, в принципі, люди мають розуміти, навіщо ми це робимо, навіщо ми там працюємо, підтримуємо людей, які повсякдень мешкають на непідконтрольних територіях. Люди мають зрозуміти, що, в принципі, в цьому і полягає гуманітарна робота.
Are you well received there on
І
the
вас
other
там
side where I
приймають
don't go and many of
нормально,
us
тому
don't
що
go?
не всі з нас наважаться туди їхати. Ну, я б не сказав, що вони нас там з розпростертими об'яттями сприймають, але в залежності від того, який період, які особи там з'являються, які питання з'являються для обговорення, іноді я б сказав, що є більше бажання працювати з нами, іноді менше.
It all depends on the issue, it all depends on the period. We've had easier times, we've had very difficult times. And when I say we, it's not just UNHCR, but some of the other UN agencies, the International Committee of the Red Cross, some of the NGOs. I mean, it's an up and down.
Бувають різні ситуації.
Am I correct in saying that?
Fortunately, no.
Ми поки
I know
нікого
we've
з
lost
них там не
OSCE,
втратили.
and the ICRC lost a colleague
Когось там
at the
втратили,
beginning
так,
of
колегу
the
там втратили на
conflict.
початку конфлікту.
The only
в їх
person who
організації.
worked with
Єдина
us
особа, яка з ними
and who
працює,
unfortunately died
але вона померла просто, не
is
вбили, просто померла, на жаль.
the lady from
Була
Kherson who
там з
was
Херсону
attacked with
жінка,
acid.
але
She
її
worked with us briefly
плеснули її
and,
кислоту. Вона недовго з нами
Katerina
працювала.
Gazyuk. And
Катерина
so
Газюк мається на увазі.
when she was attacked
І
with acid and
коли її
when she
плеснули
subsequently
кислоту, і
died,
після
that
того
for
вона
us
померла, то
was
для
a
нас
sad,
She did work with you.
це була
Yes, at the
трагедія. Вона
beginning of the
працювала з вами.
conflict
Так, на
briefly,
початку конфликту
when we
трохи
were
вона з нами
trying to
працювала, тоді ми
open
намагалися
up offices in different
відкривати
parts of
свої
Ukraine
представництва по
to
різних
support the displaced
кутах України,
Ukrainians.
для того, щоб
But then she decided to
підтримувати
move on
переселених українців, але
and,
потім вона
you
вирішила
know,
йти
do
далі,
some anti-corruption work.
займатися
Budget
антикорупційною
is always an
роботою.
issue. Are you
Бюджет
getting what
завжди
you
є
need?
проблемою, ви отримуєте стільки,
Look,
скільки потрібно для
I think
вашої роботи.
UNHCR
Я
has
думаю, що
been
ВКБ
fortunate to count on the
на
support
щастя
of
надає
donor countries. I mean,
підтримку,
Hugo, that's basically his
надходить від
job.
нас з донорських країн,
But
тому наша робота не
overall, the
зупиняється. В цілому, я маю
humanitarian
сказати, що
funding
гуманітарне
is
фінансування
decreasing.
знижується
I
так
think
на
there
загал.
are many humanitarian
Є
situations around
багато
the world
гуманітарних
and
ситуацій у
donors
світі на
are
сьогодні, і
struggling
донори
to,
вже
decide
їм важкувато
who should get what,
визначитись,
and Ukraine
кому
is
скільки
no
дати,
longer
і
in the
Україна
radar.
вже, в принципі,
But there
не
are,
основний
I
напрям.
think,
Але, в
still
принципі, я так гадаю, що
donors who have
ті донори,
consistently
які
supported Ukraine,
підтримували
and in
Україну,
doing that, they
вони
have supported
будуть
UNHCR also.
підтримувати і надалі її по лінію ВКБ.
Let's hope that continues because it's,
Нехай вона так і
desperately
буде,
needed, but there are
тому що
other
в цьому
places in
потреба
the world
є,
that
і не
also
тільки
need it,
тут, а й
like
в інших
Syria.
країнах світу, в тій же Сирії,
You know,
наприклад.
I want to say to the audience, we're
Хочу
wrapping up here,
сказати,
we're
що
closing.
ми
I think it's been a
завершуємо
great
зараз обговорення,
discussion.
воно було вдалим,
If
як
we're
на
all here in the
мене, і
auditorium, I'd ask for applause now.
давайте
But I can
поаплодуємо.
tell you, if
Я
you,
можу
for those who
сказати,
knew
що
Sergio's
ті,
story,
хто знали про
we
Серджіо,
thank you for
ми
sharing it.
дякуємо вам за
And
те, що ви
don't be
поділилися
embarrassed if you
своїми
didn't. I'm a
спогадами.
recent comer, but I tell you,
Я також не
watching
дуже
the
давно цим
documentary,
займаюся, але подивіться
watching
документальну
the
стрічку
drama,
про Серджіо
reading
і
about Sergio
фільм про Серджіо,
is
прочитайте про
is
нього.
very, and
Дуже-
you know, I'm looking forward to reading Samantha Power's
Я
book. I
хочу
was only
прочитати
able
книгу
to skim it
Саманти
before this.
Пауерс. Мені це не
Fortunately, I
вдалося
met
поки
her.
зробити.
She's really quite an author.
Я
and
з нею
quite a person.
знайомий, вона гарний автор і
I think, you know, you have a
гарна
new
особа.
appreciation for the
Отже,
people. Look
я
at the people
думаю,
who are here. We have a
він
Brazilian,
цінував
we
людей,
have El
тобто
Salvador,
це
we have
зараз
British,
є
we have
бразилець,
Japanese,
виходці
we
з
have Indian,
Британії,
and
Сальвадору, Японії,
these are the
Індії.
people doing the work
Такий
around the
міжнародний в
world.
нас колектив,
So,
який працює в різних
dangerous
країнах
work,
світу.
important work. So
Це
thank you all
важливо, але
for joining
небезпечна
us,
робота.
and
Дякую всім,
hope
що
to see
сьогодні
you
були
again.
з нами. Я думаю, що побачимося згодом знову.
Thank you.